It was supposed to be my 18th birthday. The candles were still flickering on the cake, frosting melting under the warm kitchen lights. My friends were watching. My mother was smiling nervously, and for a brief second, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, my stepdad might show me kindness for once. But he didn't even wait for the cake. Conrad Miller rose slowly from his chair at the head of the table, his arms crossed, his jaw clenched tight. The entire room fell silent. The laughter of my friends cut short like someone had pressed pause on life itself. His glare pinned me where I sat. "You're not mine," he growled, his voice like broken glass. "Get out. Tonight." Before I could move, he bent down, lifted a sagging plastic grocery bag stuffed with my clothes, and shoved it into my chest. The force of it nearly knocked the air out of me. My mother pressed her trembling hands to her mouth, her lips quivering, but no words came. That plastic bag. It became my last memory of that house. I stumbled into the storm, rain soaking through my shirt within seconds, lightning tearing the sky in half. My feet dragged through puddles as tears mixed with rain on my face. My friends didn't follow me. My mother didn't stop me. The weight of betrayal pressed me lower with every step. And then, headlights. A sleek black car screeched to a halt beside me. The tinted window slid down, and I froze. The driver, his face sharp under the dim glow of the streetlight, leaned toward me with a cold, deliberate smile. "I was sent by your real father. My name is Adrian Miller. And for as long as I can remember, I never felt like I truly belonged inside my own home in Portland, Oregon. That night, the night of my 18th birthday, would forever be etched in my memory as both an ending and a beginning. The rainwater had already soaked through my thin button-down shirt, the one my mother had ironed specially for the occasion, as I stood there, stunned, staring at the stranger in the black car. "Who are you?" My voice barely carried over the drumming of the rain on the pavement. The man extended a hand. "Samuel Grayson, your father's assistant." His eyes were calculating but not unkind. "You shouldn't be out in this storm, Adrian. Get in." I clutched the plastic grocery bag tighter against my chest. Everything I owned, or at least everything Conrad had deemed worth keeping, was inside. Some clothes, a worn paperback, my phone charger. Not even my phone. It was still on the dining room table next to the half-eaten cake. "I don't have a father," I said, even as I took a step toward the car. Samuel's mouth twitched. "That's not what Kieran Marlowe would say." The name struck me like lightning. Kieran. A name my mother had whispered only once, years ago, when she thought I was asleep. I'd never forgotten it. I slid into the backseat of the car, my soaked clothes immediately marking the pristine leather. Samuel didn't seem to mind. As he pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the house that had never really been my home. The porch light still burned, but no one stood in the doorway. No one was coming after me. "Where are we going?" I asked, my teeth beginning to chatter. "To meet your father," Samuel said simply, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "He's been waiting a very long time for this day." The city lights blurred past as we drove through Portland's rain-slicked streets. My mind raced with questions, but a peculiar numbness had settled over me. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a hollow ache where my heart should be. "Did you know this would happen?" I finally asked. "That Conrad would throw you out?" Samuel finished my sentence. "Not exactly, but Kieran suspected something might happen when you turned 18. Conrad's legal obligations to you would end, and knowing the man's character..." He let the sentence hang. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching raindrops race downward. "My mother just stood there," I whispered, more to myself than to Samuel. She didn't say anything. Samuel's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again. "Elena has made many choices over the years, Adrian. Some of them, well, it's not my place to judge." We drove in silence after that, turning onto roads I didn't recognize, heading toward the outskirts of the city. Finally, the car slowed and turned into a long driveway. Through the rain-streaked window, I could make out a large house, warm lights glowing from within. "We're here," Samuel announced, putting the car into park. I stared at the house, frozen in place. I can't just walk in there. I don't know this man. Samuel turned to face me. "But he knows you. He's known about you every day of your life." Before I could, respond, the front door of the house opened. A silhouette appeared, tall and straight-shouldered. I couldn't make out the face, but something about the way the man stood made my chest tighten. "That's him, isn't it?" I asked, barely able to breathe. Samuel nodded. "That's Kieran Marlowe, your father." I looked down at the pathetic plastic bag in my lap. I can't meet him like this. I'm soaking. Wet, I look. You look exactly like someone who needs to come home. Samuel interrupted gently. That's all he cares about. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but I hardly noticed as I stepped out of the car. My legs felt weighted with lead as I approached the house. The man on the porch didn't move, didn't rush forward. He simply waited, allowing me to cross the distance at my own pace. As I climbed the 3 steps to the porch, I could finally see his face clearly. He was older than I had imagined, with streaks of silver at his temples and lines etched around his eyes. But those eyes, they were unmistakably like mine. The same unusual shade of hazel that I saw every morning in the mirror. Eyes that Conrad had once callously referred to as cat eyes, like it was something to be ashamed of. We stood there, just looking at each other, neither of us speaking. Then, without a word, Kieran Marlowe opened his arms. I didn't move at first. Trust had never come easily to me. But something in his eyes, a depth of emotion that seemed to reach across the years of absence, broke through the wall I had built around myself. I dropped the plastic bag to the ground and fell into his arms. His embrace was firm, certain. Nothing like Conrad's stiff, obligatory touches on the rare occasions he'd been forced to acknowledge me. Kieran held me like I was something precious, something lost and found again. I've waited for this day, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Every birthday, every Christmas, every day in between. I pulled back slightly, searching his face. Why now? Why not before? Kieran's expression darkened. Come inside, Adrian. It's a long story, and not one for a porch on a rainy night. As he led me into the house, I caught a glimpse of myself in a hallway mirror. Soaked to the skin, eyes red-rimmed, hair plastered to my forehead. I looked lost, broken. But for the first time in my life, I also looked like I might belong somewhere. The house was warm and smelled faintly of coffee and old books. Kieran led me through a spacious entryway into a living room where a fire crackled in a stone fireplace. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and comfortable-looking leather furniture invited you to sink in and stay a while. You should get out of those wet clothes, Kieran said, gesturing to a hallway. Bathroom's first door on the right. I think I have some things that might fit you. While he disappeared upstairs, I stood dripping on the hardwood floor, afraid to move and leave puddles everywhere. Samuel had followed us in and now stood quietly by the door, observing. He's nervous too, Samuel offered, nodding toward the stairs where Kieran had gone. He's been rehearsing what to say. To you for years. I didn't know how to respond to that. The idea that this stranger, this man who was apparently my biological father, had been thinking about me all this time was almost too much to process. Kieran returned with a stack of clothes and a towel. These might be a bit large, but they're warm and dry. I accepted them wordlessly and retreated to the bathroom. As I peeled off my wet clothes, I caught sight of myself in the mirror again. The resemblance to Kieran was undeniable. The shape of my jaw, the set of my eyes. How had I never seen it before? Conrad and I looked nothing alike, a fact he had pointed out often enough. When I emerged in Kieran's borrowed sweatpants and hoodie, I found him in the kitchen, pouring 3 mugs of coffee. Samuel had taken off his coat and was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through his phone. The scene was so ordinary, so domestic, it felt surreal after the chaos of the evening. Black, right? Kieran asked, sliding a mug toward me. I stared at him. How did you know? A small smile played at his lips. I've learned everything I could about you, Adrian. Everything Samuel could tell me. My gaze shifted to Samuel, who didn't look up from his phone. You've been watching me? Keeping an eye on you, Samuel corrected. There's a difference. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug but didn't drink. Why? Why go to all this trouble for someone you don't even know? Kieran's face grew serious. Because you're my son, and I've known you since the moment you were born. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a worn photograph, sliding it across the counter toward me. The photo showed a much younger Kieran holding a newborn baby, his face alight with pride and wonder. Me. That baby was me. I was there when you were born, Kieran said quietly. I held you before anyone else did. I named you Adrian. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. My mother told me my father abandoned us before I was born, that he wanted nothing to do with me. Kieran's knuckles whitened around his mug. That's what Conrad wanted you to believe, what he convinced Elena to tell you. Why would she lie? My voice cracked on the question. Kieran exchanged a glance with Samuel before responding. When Elena met Conrad, you were 2 years old. I had shared custody then. weekends, holidays. But Conrad, he didn't want another man in the picture. He made it clear to Elena that if she wanted a future with him, I couldn't be part of it. And she chose him, I said flatly. It wasn't a question. She was scared, Adrian. A single mother with no family support except for her brother Darius. Conrad offered security, stability. At the mention of my uncle, I felt a pang of longing. Uncle Darius had been the only person who'd made me feel worthy in that house. He'd visit when he could, often bringing me small gifts or just taking me out for ice cream, away from Conrad's critical gaze. But his visits had grown less frequent over the years as Conrad's resentment of him became more obvious. Did Uncle Darius know about you? I asked. Kieran nodded. Darius never liked the arrangement. He tried to convince Elena to tell you the truth many times. But Conrad had ways of ensuring his compliance. What does that mean? Samuel cleared his throat. Your stepfather threatened to cut off all access to you if Darius didn't play by his rules. Your uncle chose limited contact over none at all. The betrayal cut deep, but underneath it was a glimmer of understanding. Uncle Darius had been protecting me in the only way he could. What about legally? I asked. Didn't you have rights? Kieran's expression darkened. I fought, Adrian. For years, I fought. But Conrad had resources I didn't have. Connections. He tied me up in court until I was financially drained. Then he leveraged Elena's testimony against me. Claims that I was unstable, dangerous. None of it true, but enough to convince a judge. I lost all legal, rights to you when you were 7 years old, he continued, his voice tight with old pain. The court order specified no contact until you turned 18. By then, you would be old enough to make your own decisions. I stared into my coffee, watching the ripples as my hands trembled. So you just waited? All this time? I never just waited, Kieran said firmly. I moved to Portland to be close. To you, even though I couldn't see you. I sent letters that were returned unopened, birthday gifts that never reached you. I attended every school play, every baseball game, sitting at the back, making sure Conrad didn't see me. The thought of him being there, watching from a distance while I believed he didn't exist, was almost too painful to bear. I've kept a record of your life as best I could, Kieran said. He gestured toward a hallway. Would you like to see? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Kieran led me to a room off the main hallway, Samuel hanging back to give us privacy. When Kieran opened the door, I froze on the threshold. The room was filled with me. Photos covered one wall, school pictures I recognized, candid shots taken from a distance at games and school events. Shelves held what appeared to be journals, each labeled with a year of my life. On a desk sat a collection of small items. A Little League trophy, identical to one I'd received, a duplicate, I realized. Art projects that looked like elementary school work, report cards. How? Was all I could manage. School websites post a lot of information, Kieran said. Darius helped when he could. And Samuel has ways of gathering information. I moved toward the wall of photos, drawn to one in particular. Me at about 14, pitching in a baseball game, my face set in concentration. I remembered that game. I had pitched my first no-hitter. Conrad hadn't bothered to attend. You were there, I whispered. I was always there, Adrian, Kieran said, his voice breaking slightly. Always. I turned to face him, a lifetime of questions bubbling up inside me. But only one seemed to matter in that moment. Why didn't you tell me all this tonight? Before Conrad threw me out? You could have spared me that humiliation. Kieran's eyes filled with a mixture of regret and determination. Because tonight wasn't just about reuniting with you. It was about exposing Conrad Miller for who he truly is. He showed his true colors in front of your friends, in front of Elena. There can be no more pretending now. The calculated nature of it made me step back. You used me as a pawn? No, Kieran said firmly. I protected you the only way I could, by being ready for the moment when Conrad inevitably revealed his true nature. I couldn't prevent what happened tonight, but I could make damn sure you weren't left alone in the rain. As I stood there, surrounded by the evidence of 18 years of silent love, I didn't know whether to feel rescued or manipulated. But one thing was becoming clear. The story of my life was far more complicated than I had ever imagined. And it was only just beginning to unfold. Morning light filtered through unfamiliar curtains as I blinked awake. For a moment, disorientation gripped me. The room was too spacious, the bedding too soft. Then the memories of the previous night came flooding back. My birthday, Conrad's cruel dismissal, the black car, and Kieran. I sat up slowly, taking in my surroundings. The guest room Kieran had shown me to last night was simply furnished but comfortable. My plastic grocery bag sat pathetically on a chair in the corner, a stark reminder of how quickly life could change. A soft knock on the door broke my reverie. "Come in," I called, my voice still rough with sleep. Kieran appeared, already dressed in jeans and a casual button-down, holding a steaming mug. "Thought you might want some coffee. Black, no sugar." I accepted the mug with a nod. "Thanks." He lingered in the doorway, seemingly uncertain. "Sleep okay?" "As well as could be expected," I replied, taking a sip of the coffee. It was better than what we'd had at home. At Conrad's house, I mentally corrected myself. "There's breakfast whenever you're ready," Kieran said. "No rush." After he left, I sat for a long while, cradling the mug and trying to make sense of my new reality. Part of me still couldn't believe that the man in the hallway was my biological father, that the life I'd lived had been built on lies. When I finally made my way to the kitchen, I found Kieran at the stove, flipping pancakes. The domesticity of the scene caught me off guard. "Where's Samuel?" I asked, glancing around the empty kitchen. "He doesn't live here," Kieran explained, sliding a plate toward me. "He's more than just an assistant, though. He's an old friend who's been helping me with everything regarding you." I sat at the island counter, staring at the perfectly golden pancakes. "He seems very loyal." "He is." Kieran hesitated before adding, "We went through some difficult times together. Creates a bond." I cut into the pancakes mechanically, not really tasting them. "So what happens now?" Kieran sat across from me, his own plate untouched. "That's entirely up to you, Adrian. You're 18, legally an adult. You can stay here as long as you want, or if you prefer, I can help you find an apartment. Get set up somewhere else." "What about college?" I asked. It had been a point of contention with Conrad, who'd made it clear he wouldn't contribute financially to my education. "Already taken care of," Kieran replied. "I've been putting money aside for your education since before you were born. Wherever you want to go, it's covered." I put my fork down, suddenly overwhelmed. "Why would you do that? You didn't even know if you'd ever see me again." "Because that's what fathers do," he said simply. "They provide for their children's futures, whether they're there to see it or not." The contrast with Conrad couldn't have been more stark. Conrad, who'd begrudged me every penny spent on school supplies. Conrad, who'd commented that college would be wasted on me. "I still have so many questions," I said. "I know." Kieran's expression was patient. "And I'll answer all of them. But first, there's someone who wants to see you." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Kieran rose to answer it, and moments later, a familiar voice filled the entryway. "Uncle Darius." I stood so quickly my chair nearly toppled backward. Uncle Darius appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face lined with concern that transformed into relief when he saw me. "Adrian." He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and pulled me into a bear hug. "Thank God you're okay." I returned the embrace stiffly, uncertainty still nagging at me. "When we separated," I searched his face. "Did you know? All this time?" The guilt in his eyes was answer enough. "I wanted to tell you, kid. So many times." "Then why didn't you?" The hurt in my voice was unmistakable. Darius exchanged a glance with Kieran. "Conrad made it very clear what would happen if I did. He threatened to cut off all contact with me, I know," I said, remembering Samuel's explanation. "But was seeing me occasionally worth letting me believe a lie my entire life?" "It wasn't just that," Darius said quietly. "Conrad threatened to move Elena and you away. Somewhere we would never find you again. I couldn't risk that. Your mother was complicit in this arrangement," Kieran added carefully. "Conrad had convinced her it was for the best." I sank back into my chair, trying to process this. "So my mother chose Conrad over me, over the truth." "Elena is complicated," Darius said, sitting beside me. "She's not as strong as she pretends to be. Conrad has a way of making her believe his version of reality." "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" I asked bitterly. "No," Kieran interjected. "Nothing about this situation should make you feel better, Adrian. You were wronged. By Conrad, by your mother, by a legal system that failed you, even by me, for not finding a way to reach you sooner." His honesty was refreshing after a lifetime of half-truths. I looked between the 2 men, my father and my uncle, and felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected: belonging. "Have you heard from her?" I asked Darius. "My mother?" Darius nodded grimly. "She called, me last night in a panic after you left. Said Conrad had exploded, that things had gone too far." "Did she ask where I was?" The question came out smaller than I intended. She did, Darius confirmed. I told her you were safe, that you were with family. Did you tell her about Kieran? I didn't have to, Darius replied. She knew. I think she's always known this day would come eventually. I thought that my mother had anticipated this moment, had perhaps even feared it, twisted something inside me. What does she expect me to do? Come crawling back? Actually, Darius said, she asked if she could see you. The request hung in the air between us. Part of me wanted to refuse out of spite, to make her feel a fraction of the abandonment I'd felt. But another part, the part that still, remembered her gentle hands bandaging scraped knees, her quiet humming as she braided my hair for picture day, couldn't deny her completely. Not yet, I finally said. I need time. Kieran nodded in understanding. Time is one thing you have plenty of now, Adrian. No one's rushing you into anything. The day passed in a blur of revelations as Kieran showed me more of the evidence he'd gathered. Over the years, court documents, returned letters, even a restraining order Conrad had taken out against him when I was 9, claiming harassment. He's methodical, Kieran explained, spreading the papers on the dining table. Everything done legally. Everything documented. On paper, he looks like a concerned stepfather protecting his family from a potentially dangerous biological parent. But it's all lies, I said, scanning a particularly damning affidavit supposedly signed by my mother, claiming Kieran had threatened her. Your mother's signature on some of these is questionable, Darius noted, examining the documents. I've always wondered if Conrad forged them. By evening, my head was spinning with all I'd learned. After Darius left, promising to return tomorrow, Kieran and I sat on the back deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I know this is a lot to take in, Kieran said gently. If you need space, just say the word. I shook my head. No, I've had 18 years of space. What I need now is the truth, all of it. Kieran nodded, his eyes reflecting the dying light. Then that's what you'll get, Adrian. No matter how difficult it might be to hear. As night fell over my new beginning, I realized that the plastic bag Conrad had thrust at me, intended as a final insult, had actually been my ticket to freedom, to the truth, to the father who had never stopped fighting for me. And for the first time since I could remember, I felt something like hope. 3 days passed in Kieran's house, each one bringing new revelations about the life I could have had. I learned that Kieran was a successful architect with his own small firm in downtown Portland, that he'd deliberately chosen projects that kept him close to the city, close to me, that the house we were in had been designed with me in mind, with a bedroom that had sat empty for years, waiting. On the 4th morning, I woke to the sound of my phone ringing. Not my old phone, which was still at Conrad's house, but a new one Kieran had given me for emergencies. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized it immediately. My mother. I let it ring through to voicemail, my thumb hovering over the screen. A moment later, a text message appeared. Adrian, please. I need to talk to you. I can explain everything. I stared at the message until the screen went dark, conflicting emotions battling inside me. Part of me wanted to hear what she had to say. Another part feared that whatever explanation she offered would only hurt more. When I finally emerged from my room, I found Kieran in his home office, sketching at a drafting table. He looked up as I entered, his pencil pausing mid-stroke. Everything okay? I held up the phone. My mother texted. She wants to talk. Kieran set his pencil down carefully. And what do you want? The question was simple, but profound. For so long, what I wanted had been secondary. To Conrad's demands, to my mother's compliance, to the daily struggle of just trying to exist in a house where I wasn't welcome. I think I need to hear her out, I said slowly. Not for her sake, but for mine. Kieran nodded. I understand. Do you want me to be there? No, I replied, more confidently than I felt. This is something I need to do myself. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where neither of us would have the home court advantage. As Samuel drove me there, Kieran had insisted, I rehearsed what I would say, how I would maintain my composure. Remember, Samuel said as he pulled up to the curb, you're in control of this meeting. If at any point you want to leave, just text me. I'll be waiting around the corner. The coffee shop was busy with the mid-morning rush, but I spotted my mother immediately, sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a mug as if seeking warmth despite the mild day. She looked smaller somehow, diminished with dark circles under her eyes, and her usual perfect makeup noticeably absent. When she saw me, she half rose from her chair, uncertainty in every line of her body. Adrian. I slid into the seat opposite her, not returning her greeting. You wanted to talk. She sank back down, her fingers fidgeting with her mug. I don't know where to start. How about with the truth? I suggested coldly. That would be a nice change. She flinched as if I'd struck her. I deserve that. I deserve much worse. Why did you lie to me? I asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. About my father. About everything. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I steeled myself against them. Tears had been her defense mechanism for as long as I could remember, a way to deflect Conrad's anger, to avoid difficult conversations. When I met... Conrad, you were so young, she began. Barely 2. I was struggling, working 2 jobs, barely making rent. Kieran was trying, but he didn't have much either back then. So you traded me for financial security, I summarized bluntly. No. The word came out sharp, drawing glances from nearby tables. She lowered her voice. At least that's not how I saw it then. Conrad seemed like the answer to everything. Stable, successful, interested in a ready-made family. Until I wasn't the son he wanted, I said. A tear slipped down her cheek. He changed after we were married. Became controlling, critical, especially of you. By then, I was pregnant with Emma. My half-sister, now 15, had been the golden child in Conrad's eyes. His real child. While he'd barely tolerated me, he'd doted on Emma, creating a divide between us that had only grown wider with time. That doesn't explain why you kept Kieran from me, why you let me believe he'd abandoned us. Conrad convinced me it would be confusing for you to have 2 father figures, she said, her voice small. He said a clean break would be better. Then when Kieran fought for custody, Conrad said he was trying to take you away from me. And you believed him? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. I was scared, Adrian. Scared of losing the security Conrad provided. Scared of being alone again. When Conrad threatened to leave if I didn't cut Kieran out completely. She trailed off, looking down at her hands. So you chose him, I finished for her. Every time you chose him. I thought I was choosing stability for both my children, she whispered. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. We sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the coffee shop washing over us. I studied my mother's face, the face I'd searched for approval in for 18 years, always finding it tinged with worry or fear or regret. What happened after I left? I finally asked. Her eyes met mine, red-rimmed but steadier now. I told Conrad he had gone too far, that what he did to you was unforgivable. And he said good riddance. The words seemed to pain her physically. That's when I knew, truly knew, what kind of man I'd married, what I'd sacrificed you for. Where's Emma in all this? With my sister in Seattle, she replied. I sent her there the day after your birthday. I didn't want her to see what was, happening. I nodded, relieved that at least my sister was safe from the fallout. Despite our differences, I'd always tried to protect Emma from the worst of Conrad's behavior. So what now? I asked. My mother took a deep breath. I've filed for divorce. I'm staying with Darius for now. The news stunned me. After years of watching her bend to Conrad's will, of hearing her make excuses for his behavior, the decisiveness of this action seemed out of character. What changed? I couldn't help asking. You did, she said simply. Seeing you walk out into that storm, knowing what I'd allowed to happen to you, something broke in me, Adrian. Something I don't think can ever be fixed. But I'm trying to do the right thing now, even if it's too late. I wanted to tell her it was indeed too late. That 18 years of silence and compliance couldn't be erased with one brave act. But looking at her now, stripped of the careful facade she'd maintained in Conrad's presence, I saw something I hadn't expected. A reflection of myself. The same uncertainty. The same struggle to break free from a narrative someone else had written. It's not too late for Emma, I said finally. Make sure she knows the truth. All of it. My mother nodded, fresh tears spilling over. And is it too late for us? I didn't have an answer for that question. Not yet. Instead, I asked one of my own. Did you ever love him? Kieran, I mean? A small, sad smile touched her lips. With all my heart. He is a good man, Adrian. The kind who would give everything for the people he loves. Then why? Because sometimes loving someone isn't enough, she interrupted gently. Sometimes fear is stronger. As I walked out of the coffee shop an hour later, the weight on my shoulders felt simultaneously heavier and lighter. The conversation hadn't provided the closure I'd hoped for, But it had opened a door to understanding, not forgiveness. Not yet, but perhaps the beginning of a path toward it. Samuel was waiting exactly where he said he'd be. As I slid into the passenger seat, he glanced at me questioningly. How'd it go? I stared out at the Portland streets, at the city that had been my home and yet never truly felt like one. She's left Conrad, I said. Filed for divorce. Samuel nodded as if this wasn't a surprise. Your father will want to know. She loved him once, I added, almost to myself. Kieran, she did, Samuel confirmed, pulling away from the curb. And despite everything, I think a part of him never stopped loving her. That revelation added yet another layer of complexity to the tapestry of my newly discovered life. As we drove back toward Kieran's house, toward the possibility of a real home, I wondered if there was still a chance to weave together the broken threads of my family into something new, something whole. Not the family I'd lost, but perhaps one I could find. A week passed, then two. Life with Kieran settled into a cautious routine as I began to navigate this new version of myself. Adrian Marlowe, not Adrian Miller. Kieran had offered to help me legally change my name if I wanted, but I hadn't decided yet. After 18 years of being defined by a name that wasn't truly mine, the choice felt both liberating and overwhelming. On a sunny Tuesday afternoon, I found myself helping Kieran in his home office, sorting through architectural blueprints for a community center he was designing downtown. Hand me that red folder? He asked, gesturing toward a stack on his desk. As I reached for it, my eyes caught on a framed photo I hadn't, noticed before. Kieran and my mother, much younger, her head on his shoulder, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. They looked happy. In love. When was this taken? I asked, picking up the frame. Kieran glanced up, his expression softening. The summer before you were born. We went camping at Mount Hood. Your mother was terrified of bears, but she pretended not to be for my sake. I studied the photo more closely, trying to reconcile this joyful young woman with the subdued, anxious mother I knew. She seems different. She was, Kieran said quietly. Elena had a light about her back then. A confidence. What happened? Kieran sat back in his chair, considering his words carefully. Life happened. Unexpected pregnancy, financial struggles, and then Conrad. Did you know him? Before, I mean? Not personally, Kieran replied. But I knew of him. He was already making a name for himself in construction when I was just starting out in architecture. Our paths crossed occasionally at industry events. A thought occurred to me. Did he know about you and Mom? Something flickered across Kieran's face, a shadow of old anger, quickly controlled. Yes, that's what makes this all the more... He trailed off, shaking his head. Deliberate, I finished for him. Kieran nodded grimly. Conrad Miller doesn't do anything without calculation, Adrian. Remember that. The warning stayed with me as we worked side by side through the afternoon. There was something comforting about the quiet companionship, the shared focus, the occasional question or comment passed between us. I'd never experienced this kind of ease with Conrad, who demanded perfection and offered criticism instead of guidance. Later that evening, as we were clearing away dinner dishes, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It's Emma. Uncle Darius gave me your number. Can we talk? I stared at the message, my heart racing. My half-sister and I had never been close, partly due to the age difference, partly due to Conrad's obvious favoritism. But she had always been kind to me in her quiet way, slipping me notes of encouragement after particularly brutal confrontations with Conrad, or saving me a piece of dessert when I was sent to my room without dinner. Everything okay? Kieran asked, noticing my expression. It's Emma, I replied, still staring at the phone. She wants to talk. Kieran's expression remained neutral. Are you going to? I don't know. I set the phone down. She's Conrad's daughter. She's your sister, Kieran corrected gently. And from what you've told me, she's never treated you the way Conrad did. He was right, of course. It wasn't fair to hold Emma accountable for her father's actions. After a moment's hesitation, I picked up the phone and replied, Sure. When and where? The response came almost immediately. Now? I'm at Aunt Rachel's, but I can meet you at the park near Uncle Darius's place in 20 minutes. I looked up at Kieran. She wants to meet now. He nodded toward the door. Then go. Take my car. 30 minutes later, I was sitting on a bench in the small neighborhood park near Uncle Darius's apartment, watching as Emma approached from the street. At 15, she was already tall and graceful, with our mother's delicate features and Conrad's dark hair. She wore jeans and a hoodie that seemed too large for her frame, her hands tucked into the sleeves. Hey, she said softly, sitting beside me. Hey, I replied, suddenly unsure what to say to this girl who shared my blood but so little of my experience. Mom told, me everything, she blurted out, staring at her sneakers. About your real dad. About what dad? What Conrad did. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. I didn't know, she whispered. All those years I thought you were just difficult, like Conrad always said, that you were ungrateful. The words stung, but her obvious distress softened their impact. You were a kid, Emma. You believed what you were told. But I saw how he treated you, she insisted, finally looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. I knew it wasn't right. I just didn't know why. It wasn't your responsibility to fix it, I said. Maybe not, but I could have been a better sister. Her voice caught. I'm sorry, Adrian. The simple apology, so direct, so sincere, broke through something in me. Here was someone else who had been manipulated by Conrad, albeit in a different way. He had used her as a weapon against me, cultivating her as the good child to highlight my supposed deficiencies. You have nothing to apologize for, I told her firmly. Emma wiped at her eyes with her sleeve. Mom says she's never going back to him, that she should have left years ago. Do you believe her? Emma considered the question. I think so. She seems different now. Stronger. And how do you feel about that? I asked carefully. Relieved, she admitted, and guilty for feeling relieved. He's still my dad. I nodded in understanding. Just because he's your father doesn't mean you have to excuse what he did. Is that how you feel about Mom? Emma asked, her gaze direct and penetrating in a way that reminded me she was no longer the little girl I'd left behind. I'm still figuring that out, I answered honestly. We talked for nearly an hour as the sky darkened and the park lights flickered on. Emma told me about Conrad's reaction to my mother's departure, the rage, the threats, the sudden charm offensive when he realized she was serious about the divorce. She spoke of their mother's transformation, how she was standing up to Conrad in ways they'd never seen before. She talks about your father sometimes, Emma said as we walked back toward Uncle Darius's apartment. Kieran, when Conrad's not around, she gets this look on her face. What kind of look? Emma shrugged. Like she's remembering something good. Something real. The observation stayed with me as I drove back to Kieran's house. I found him in the living room pretending to read, but obviously waiting up for me. How was it? He asked, setting aside his book. Good, I replied, sinking onto the sofa across from him. Better than I expected. She's smart, Kieran, sees more than she lets on. Like her brother, Kieran remarked with a small smile. I hesitated before continuing. She said Mom talks about you. Sometimes. That she gets a certain look on her face when she does. Kieran's expression remained carefully neutral. Elena and I have a complicated history. Do you still love her? The question escaped before I could consider its implications. Kieran was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some middle distance. I loved who she was, he finally said. Who we were together. But people change, Adrian? Sometimes in ways that make them unrecognizable to those who loved them before. It wasn't quite an answer, but it was honest. And honesty, I was learning, was Kieran's default state. So different from the careful omissions and outright lies that had shaped my childhood. I think I'd like to change my name, I said suddenly. Legally, I mean. To Marlowe. Kieran's eyes widened. Slightly. Are you sure? I'm sure I don't want to be a Miller anymore, I replied firmly. A smile spread across Kieran's face, not triumphant, but deeply satisfied. Then we'll make it happen. Adrian Marlowe. The name settled around me like a well-worn jacket, comfortable and right. For the first time, I felt like I was choosing my own identity, rather than having one imposed upon me. And in that, choice was the first true foundation stone of my new life. The legal process of changing my name turned out to be straightforward. What wasn't straightforward were the ripples it created throughout my fragile new reality. My mother, when told of my decision, had gone silent for a long moment before saying, I understand. But the hurt in her voice was unmistakable, as if by taking Kieran's name, I was making a final judgment on her choices. Conrad's reaction was more volatile. According to Emma, he'd flown into a rage when he heard, ranting about ungrateful brats and manipulative tactics. He'd even shown up at Uncle Darius's apartment, demanding to speak to my mother, claiming that Kieran was turning me against the real family that had raised me. The confrontation had ended with the police being called and Conrad being issued a warning for disturbing the peace. But the incident had shaken both my mother and Emma, reinforcing the growing realization that Conrad's controlled facade concealed a much darker reality. I was considering all this as I sat in the bleachers at my old high school baseball field watching practice. I hadn't returned to school since my birthday. Kieran had arranged for me to complete my senior year through online courses, but I'd stayed in touch with a few friends from the team. Today was the first time I'd felt ready to face them. "Miller, is that you?" I turned to see Coach Ramirez climbing the bleachers toward me, his weathered face breaking into a smile. He'd been one of the few adults at school who'd shown genuine interest in my well-being, who'd noticed when I came to practice with shadows under my eyes or tension in my shoulders. "It's Marlowe now, actually," I corrected, standing to shake his hand. "Adrian Marlowe." Coach's eyebrows rose, but he didn't comment on the change. "Good to see you, kid. Team's not the same without your arm." "Thanks, Coach. I miss it." He settled beside me on the bench, eyes on the field where players were running drills. "Heard things got rough at home. News traveled fast in high school circles." "Yeah, you could say that." "You doing okay?" The question was simple, direct. Typical Coach Ramirez. "Getting there," I replied honestly. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good, that's good." After a pause, he added, "You know, college scouts were asking about you before you stopped coming to school. The information caught me off guard." "Scouts?" "Portland State, Oregon State. They liked what they saw at regionals last season." He glanced at me. "Not too late, you know. Season's just starting." The idea was tempting. Baseball had always been my escape, the one place where I could channel frustration into something productive, where I was valued for what I could contribute rather than tolerated, despite who I was. "I'll think about it," I promised. Coach clapped me on the shoulder and stood. "You do that? And Adrian? Whatever name you're using, you've always got a place on my team." The simple affirmation meant more than he could know. After practice, a few of my teammates approached. Cautiously at first, then with growing enthusiasm as they realized I wasn't there to rehash the humiliating scene at my birthday party. "Dude, we've been trying to reach you," said Miguel, my catcher for 3 seasons. "Your old number's disconnected." "Yeah, sorry about that," I replied, giving them my new contact information. "So you're living with your real dad now?" asked Trey, our shortstop. "That's wild." I nodded, not elaborating. Some things were still too fresh, too private to share. Casually. "Conrad's been telling people you had a breakdown," Miguel said, lowering his voice. "That you made up this whole story about having another father." Anger flared in me, hot and sudden. Of course Conrad would try to control the narrative, to paint me as unstable rather than admit to his own cruelty. "That's not what happened," I said, my voice tight. Miguel held up his hands. "Hey, we know that." Nobody believed him anyway. Guy's always been a dick. The blunt assessment startled a laugh out of me. "Yeah, he has." We talked for a while longer, the conversation gradually shifting to safer topics. Upcoming games, college applications, senior prank plans. It felt almost normal, this slice of my old life continuing without me. As I was leaving the field, my phone rang. "Kieran." "Everything okay?" I answered. "Conrad's here," Kieran said without preamble, his voice tense. "At the house, demanding to see you." My stomach dropped. "What? Why?" "He says he has some of your things. Important documents." "Don't let him in," I said immediately, picturing Conrad's imposing figure in Kieran's carefully constructed sanctuary. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. I broke every speed. Limit driving back to Kieran's house, my mind racing with scenarios, none of them good. Conrad had never sought me out before. What could he possibly want now? When I arrived, I found Conrad's luxury SUV parked in the driveway behind Kieran's modest sedan. As I pulled up, the front door opened and Samuel emerged, his normally impassive face tight with anger. "He's inside," Samuel said as I approached. "Kieran's keeping it civil, but barely." I took a deep breath and stepped into the house. The tension hit me like a physical wave. Conrad standing rigid in the living room, Kieran opposite him, arms crossed defensively over his chest. "Adrian," Conrad acknowledged, his tone falsely pleasant. "Or should I say Marlowe now?" Quite the dramatic gesture. "What do you want, Conrad?" I asked, ignoring the bait. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. "Your birth certificate, social security card, passport, things you'll need." I stared at him suspiciously. Conrad had never done anything out of kindness. "You could have mailed those. Or given them to Mom." A tight smile. "And missed the opportunity to see how my former stepson is faring? To meet the man who's been so determined to insert himself into our family?" I was never part of your family, I said quietly. You made that very clear. Conrad's smile hardened. Yes, well, perhaps I was hasty that night, said things in anger that were regrettable. Kieran made a small noise of disbelief, quickly suppressed. What's this really about, Conrad? I pressed. Conrad's facade of civility slipped for a moment, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Your mother is being unreasonable about the divorce, demanding things she has no right to. I thought perhaps you might speak to her, encourage a more cooperative approach. So that was it. He thought he could use me as leverage against my mother, now that she was finally standing up for herself. No, I said simply. Conrad's eyes narrowed. No, I'm not going to help you manipulate my mother, not anymore. I took a step forward, finding strength in the knowledge that I was standing in a home where I was genuinely wanted. You can give me those documents and leave, or you can take them with you. Either way, this conversation is over. For a moment, Conrad looked genuinely taken aback, as if he couldn't comprehend being denied something he wanted. Then his expression hardened into the cold mask I remembered all too well. You're making a mistake, he said softly. Both of you. His gaze shifted to include Kieran. Elena won't sustain this independence for long. She never does. And when she comes back, as she always has before, where will that leave you? The question was directed at me, but it was Kieran who answered, his voice steady and certain. It will leave Adrian exactly where he is now, with family who loves him, regardless of what Elena chooses. Conrad looked between us, clearly searching for a weakness to exploit and finding none. Finally, he tossed the envelope onto the coffee table. Enjoy your happy reunion while it lasts, he said, moving toward the door. Family isn't as simple as you seem to think. Marlowe, blood or not. After he left, the house seemed to exhale, the tension draining away but leaving a residue of unease. I sank onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. You okay? Kieran asked, sitting beside me. Yeah. I picked up the envelope Conrad had left, verifying the contents. Just surprised. I didn't think he'd ever want to see me again. He doesn't, Kieran said bluntly. He wanted to use you. And when that didn't work, he tried to sow doubt. I thought about Conrad's parting words, about family not being as simple as we thought. Do you think he's right? About Mom going back to him? Kieran was silent for a long moment, considering. I don't know, he finally admitted. Elena has made choices I couldn't understand before. But people can change, Adrian. Sometimes it just takes finding the right reason. I nodded, turning the passport over in my hands. It bore the name Adrian Miller, a person who no longer existed, at least not in the same way. What do we do now? I asked. Kieran smiled slightly. Now? We continue building, one day at a time. He nodded toward the envelope. And we get you new identification with your real name. As I looked at the documents, tangible, proof of the life I'd lived under Conrad's roof, I realized that I was standing at a crossroads. I could remain defined by the past, by the resentment and hurt that Conrad had cultivated, or I could step into the future that Kieran was offering, one built on truth and acceptance. In that moment, sitting in the warm glow of Kieran's living room, the choice seemed suddenly, beautifully clear. Summer arrived in Portland with a gentleness that seemed to mirror the gradual healing in my own life. 4 months had passed since my 18th birthday, the night that had ended one chapter of my existence and begun another. In that time, I'd settled into life with Kieran, officially changed my name to Adrian Marlowe, completed my high school requirements, and even returned to baseball, playing the last few games of the season with my old team. The morning of my high school graduation dawned clear and bright. I stood in front of the mirror in my room, no longer the guest room, but mine in every sense, adjusting the tie Kieran had helped me select. Nervous? Kieran appeared in the doorway, already dressed in a sharp navy suit. A little, I admitted. I wasn't sure I'd make it here. He nodded, in understanding. But you did, and I couldn't be prouder. The ceremony would be small, just the online program graduates, but significant nonetheless. Both Kieran and my mother would be there, sitting separately but both present for this milestone. It would be the first time they'd be in the same space since before I was born. Do you think it will be weird? I asked, voicing the concern that had been nagging at me. Mom and you, I mean. Kieran considered the question seriously. Probably, but this day isn't about us, Adrian. It's about you. When we arrived at the community college auditorium where the ceremony was being held, I spotted my mother immediately. She stood just outside the entrance, wearing a pale blue dress I'd never seen before. Emma was beside her, looking surprisingly grown up in a sundress and sandals. "There's your mom and sister," Kieran said, his voice carefully neutral. "Go ahead. I'll find a seat inside." I appreciated his sensitivity, giving me space for this moment rather than forcing an awkward reunion. As I approached, my mother's face lit up with a smile that contained both pride and hesitation. "Adrian," she said, opening her arms. "You look so handsome." I stepped into her embrace, still finding it strange how our relationship had evolved over these past months. We weren't close. Too much lay between us for that, but we were finding our way toward something like peace. Emma hugged me next, with the straightforward affection that had characterized our newly strengthened relationship. "Congrats, big brother. You made it." "Thanks for coming," I said, looking between them. "Both of you." "We wouldn't miss it," my mother assured me. Her eyes flickered past me, and I knew without turning that she'd spotted Kieran. Something complex passed across her face. Regret, perhaps, or nostalgia. "He's inside?" she asked. I nodded. "Is that okay?" She smiled slightly. "Of course, he's your father. He should be here." The simple acknowledgement, so different from the years of denial and silence, meant more than she could know. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of speeches, names, and applause. When my name was called, Adrian Marlowe, I heard cheers from two different sections of the audience. As I crossed the stage, diploma in hand, I caught sight of them. Kieran standing tall and proud, my mother with tears streaming down her face, Emma whistling loudly with fingers in her mouth, and, unexpectedly, Uncle Darius and Samuel, side by side in the back row. My family. Unconventional, fractured, but mine. The reception afterward could have been awkward, but somehow wasn't. Kieran approached my mother with a dignified nod, which she returned. They spoke briefly, their conversation too quiet for me to overhear, but when they parted, both seemed at peace. "What did you say to each other?" I asked Kieran later, as we were driving home. He smiled slightly. "We acknowledged the past and agreed that your future was more important than our history." That night, as friends and family gathered at Kieran's house for a small celebration, I found myself observing the interactions with a sense of wonder. Uncle Darius and Samuel debating baseball statistics by the grill, Emma showing my former teammates her photography portfolio, my mother and Kieran carefully navigating each other's space, polite but no longer adversarial. Only Conrad's absence marked the occasion, though his shadow seemed increasingly distant. "He's contesting everything in the divorce," my mother confided when we had a moment alone. "But my lawyer says he doesn't have much ground to stand on, especially after—" She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "After what?" I prompted. She sighed. Emma testified about his behavior, things she'd witnessed over the years. His treatment of you, of me. It was brave of her. I glanced across the yard to where my sister was laughing with Miguel. "She's stronger than anyone gave her credit for." "Like her brother," my mother said softly. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself standing on the back deck with Kieran, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Thank you," I said simply, "for everything." Kieran's hand settled on my shoulder, a touch that had become familiar and comforting over these months. "You don't need to thank me. Adrian, being your father isn't something I do out of obligation. It's who I am." The words resonated deeply, highlighting the fundamental difference between him and Conrad. Conrad had seen fatherhood as a role to be performed or rejected at will. For Kieran, it was an identity, inseparable from his sense of self. "I got something for you," Kieran said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small box and handed it to me. A graduation gift. Inside was a key on a simple silver keychain. "What's this for?" I asked, though I had a suspicion. "An apartment," Kieran confirmed. "Near Portland State, if you still want to go there in the fall." The baseball scholarship had come through 2 weeks earlier, a surprise I hadn't quite processed yet. The idea of staying in Portland, of playing, college ball while studying architecture, another surprise development influenced by hours spent watching Kieran work, had begun to feel right. "I thought maybe you'd want your own space," Kieran continued. "Independence, but close enough that you can come home whenever you want." Home. The word had such different connotations now than it had just months ago. "Thank you," I said again, closing my hand around the key. "But you know, I'm not in a hurry to leave. This place," I gestured to the house behind us. "It feels like home now." Kieran's smile was warm. "It is. Always. But part of growing up is building your own spaces while knowing you always have a foundation to return to. As the last guests departed and night settled over the house, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The plastic bag that had seemed like an ending had actually been the beginning. A doorway to the truth, to a father who had never stopped waiting, to the person I was meant to become. Conrad had intended that night to be my final humiliation. Instead, it had become my liberation. And standing in the quiet aftermath of celebration, key in hand and future stretching before me, I realized that sometimes the greatest gift of pain is the strength it creates in those who survive it. 1 year later, the courtroom was cooler than I expected, the air conditioning humming softly beneath the muted conversations of those gathered for the final divorce hearing between my mother and Conrad. I sat in the back row beside Emma, both of us there by choice rather than obligation. Kieran had offered to come for moral support, but I'd declined. This chapter needed to close without him present. "You okay?" Emma whispered, squeezing my hand as Conrad entered with his attorney, his face set in the stern mask I remembered all too well. "Fine," I assured her. "You?" She nodded, though the slight tremble in her fingers betrayed her tension. At 16, Emma had become remarkably poised, handling the fracturing of our family with a maturity that surprised everyone except me. I'd always known her quiet exterior concealed a core of steel. My mother sat at the plaintiff's table, her back straight, her attorney, a formidable woman with steel-gray hair and piercing eyes, leaning close to whisper something in her ear. Mom had changed over this past year, growing steadier, more confident. She was working full-time at the medical clinic now, had moved into her own apartment, was slowly rebuilding her life without Conrad's controlling presence. The proceedings began with formal statements. The judge, an older man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, reviewing the case history. I half-listened, having heard most of it before. The contested assets, the accusations from both sides, the final settlement proposal. When Conrad rose to make his statement, I felt Emma stiffen beside me. His voice carried clearly through the courtroom, measured and reasonable, the voice he used when he wanted to impress, to manipulate. "Your Honor, I've devoted nearly a decade of my life to providing for Elena and her children. I welcomed her son as my own, gave them both stability and opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise." The blatant lie made my jaw clench, but I remained silent. This wasn't my battle anymore. "The demands being made are unreasonable and vindictive," Conrad continued, his tone hardening slightly, "designed to punish me for a marriage that simply didn't work out." He spoke for several minutes more, painting himself as the wronged party, the generous provider abandoned by an ungrateful wife. To someone who didn't know him, he might have seemed sincere, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes, the slight tremor in his hand that betrayed his anger. When it was my mother's turn to speak, she rose slowly, smoothing her simple navy dress. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than Conrad's, but no less firm. "Your Honor, I'm not here seeking revenge or punishment," she began. "I'm here to end a relationship that was built on control and fear, to secure a future for myself and my daughter free from manipulation." She didn't look at Conrad as she spoke, her gaze fixed on the judge. For years, I allowed myself to be diminished, to accept behavior that harmed not only me but my children. I believed I had no choice, that security came at, the price of dignity. I was wrong. I felt a surge of pride as she continued, detailing not the material aspects of the marriage, but the emotional cost, the isolation from family, the controlled finances, the gradual erosion of her independence. She mentioned me only briefly, noting that Conrad's treatment of me had been the wake-up call I should have heeded years earlier, when both sides had presented their cases and the attorneys had made their final arguments. The judge called a brief recess to review the settlement agreement. As we waited in the hallway outside, Conrad approached, his attorney trailing behind with an expression of resignation. "Elena?" Conrad nodded curtly to my mother before his gaze shifted to me. "Adrian." I returned his nod, but said nothing. There was nothing left to say. "I hope you're satisfied," he continued, his voice low enough that only we could hear. "Destroying a family, turning my own daughter against me." "You did that yourself?" Emma said suddenly, her voice steady despite the flush rising in her cheeks. "I saw how you treated Adrian, how you treated Mom. I made my own choices." Conrad's expression hardened. "You're 16, Emma. You don't understand the complexities." "I understand enough," she interrupted, I understand that family isn't about control or conditions. It's about love. Unconditional love. The words seemed to hit Conrad like a physical blow. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I caught a glimpse of something I'd never seen in him before. Uncertainty. Perhaps even regret. His attorney touched his arm. Mr. Miller, we should return to the courtroom. Conrad hesitated, then turned away without another word. As he walked down the hallway, his shoulders seemed less imposing than I remembered, his stride less confident. You okay? I asked Emma, impressed by her courage. She nodded, blinking back tears. I just needed him to hear it, at least once. When the judge delivered his final ruling, approving the settlement with minor modifications, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized I was still carrying. This formal ending marked the true conclusion of the chapter that had begun on my 18th birthday, the night that had seemed like an ending, but had actually been a beginning. Outside the courthouse, standing in the warm summer sunshine, my mother embraced Emma, then turned to me with questioning eyes. Dinner tonight? She asked. To celebrate? I hesitated. Actually, I was going to have dinner with Kieran. We're finalizing plans for the trip. Kieran and I were leaving in 2 days for a 3-week road trip. A chance to bond, to see the country together, to make up for some of the father-son moments we'd missed. It was his gift to me for completing my freshman year of college. With honors. Of course, my mother said, understanding in her eyes. Another time, then. Why don't you both come? I suggested impulsively. Kieran wouldn't mind. The invitation hung in the air for a moment. My mother and Kieran had maintained a careful, polite distance over this past year. They'd been in the same room for various events, my graduation, a few holiday gatherings, but always with others present, never in an intimate setting. Are you sure? My mother asked. I nodded. I'm sure. That evening, as the 4 of us sat around the table at Kieran's favorite restaurant, I watched the tentative interactions between the adults who had shaped my life in such different ways. There was no rekindled romance, no dramatic reconciliation, just 2 people who had once loved each other, deeply finding a way to exist in the same space with grace and respect. To new beginnings, Kieran proposed, raising his glass. We clinked glasses, the simple toast carrying different meanings for each of us. For Emma, it was the promise of a more honest relationship with both parents. For my mother, it was freedom from a marriage that had diminished her. For Kieran, it was the full expression of the fatherhood he'd been denied for so long. And for me, it was the understanding that family wasn't defined by perfect harmony or the absence of pain. It was defined by truth, by choosing to love even when it was difficult, by the courage to begin again after devastation. Later that night, as Kieran and I sat on the back deck of the house that had become my true home, he handed me an envelope. What's this? I asked, opening it to find a legal document. The deed to the house, he explained. I've put your name on it. Joint ownership. I stared at him, stunned. Kieran, I can't accept this. This is your house. He shook his head, his expression gentle but firm. It's our house, Adrian. It always has been. From the moment I designed it with you in mind. I want you to know that whatever happens, you will always have a home. No one can take that away from you. Ever again. The plastic grocery bag that Conrad had thrust at me a year ago, intended as a final rejection, flashed through my mind. How different this gesture was. Not a dismissal, but an anchoring. Not an ending, but a promise. Thank you, I said, knowing the words were inadequate but unable to find better ones. Kieran smiled, understanding all I couldn't say. Family isn't about who stays in the same house. It's about who never stops fighting for you, who claims you no matter what. As stars appeared in the Portland sky and the future stretched before me, open with possibility rather than shadowed by rejection, I realized that Conrad's cruelest act had ultimately led me to my greatest gift, the truth of who I was, and where I belonged. The plastic bag that was supposed to be my last memory of that house had become instead the first step on the journey home.